All right, shall we get started? Aloha kako. Thanks everybody for joining us virtually, as it were. My name is Tyler McMahon. I'm a novelist and I teach writing at Hawaii Pacific University in downtown Honolulu. And I'll be your moderator for this event this evening. I'm joined by two terrific Hawaii writers, Sara Ackerman and Gregory Shepherd. And I thought we'd just have them tell us about their work in their own words a little bit, and then we'll sort of start a conversation. Please do feel free to put any questions in the Zoom chat, and we'll be sure that they get asked of our writers. So without further ado, I think we'll start with Sara Ackerman, who's the author of Radar Girls, which I can hold up a little ways until it blends into the virtual background. A really terrific historical novel set on Oahu during World War II. I really enjoyed this book, and I wondered if, Sara, perhaps you could tell us about it in your own words and anything else about your work in general that you might want to say.
Okay, so Radar Girls is actually my fourth historical novel set in Hawaii, World War II era. And this novel is about a young woman, a ranch hand on the North Shore, who is recruited into this top secret women's air raid defense, which was set up just after the attack on Pearl Harbor to defend the Hawaiian Islands. And so it's really a story about her life and how it's dramatically altered after she enters into this group. And it's a story of love and friendship, and with a little bit of intrigue thrown into the mix, horses. And so yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Excellent. Would you be so kind as to read a little bit from it for us?
Sure. I will read about maybe a page and a half starting from the first chapter. Okay. So chapter 1, The Sky Falls, December 7th, 1941. This is Waialua, Oahu. On Sunday mornings, while everyone else was singing and praying to the Lord above, Daisy could be found underwater with the pufferfish and the eagle rays. Not that she had anything against God. In fact, she spoke to him often, but you couldn't eat the Bible. She stood with her toes buried in the cool sand and surveyed the water. Clouds blocked the low sun, but a few beams shot out, creating blue islands of light. The big question of the day was whether to swim toward Haleiwa or to Mokuleia. A swell had filled in during the night, and the low rumble of surf on the outer reef cut through the quiet. Going north would be more protected, so she decided on that. Just before she dove in, her borrowed horse, Moon, whinnied loudly. The animal reared up, straining at the rope that tied him to the ironwood tree. "What is it, boy?" Daisy said, looking around for any stray dogs or something that could have spooked the animal. There was nothing out of the ordinary to be seen, just open beach and bushes. She walked back to the nervous horse and stood next to him, speaking in a calm voice. "Just relax and eat your grass. I'll be back soon." Moon snorted and swung his head away from her. His neck was still slick with sweat from galloping down the beach. She had known he was fast, but to feel him under her bare legs like that was something different altogether. He was speed and power and grace all mixed up in one big, beautiful horse. Daisy had taken a risk in riding him this morning. Nalu, the old horse that she often rode, had a swollen knee when she'd arrived at the stables. Moon happened to be in the next stall and had pranced around with a look that said, "Get me out of here." He and Daisy had developed a deep bond over the past few months, solidified by the basket of guavas that she brought to work every day. She had been itching to take him out on her own. Tall, black, and spirited, Moon was without a doubt the most beautiful horse she'd ever met, and the most expensive. She was smitten, to say the least. As long as she was back before church let out, no one would ever know. So I'll just stop there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And so your other books are set during World War II in Hawaii, but they're not the same characters or anything, all totally different casts and whatnot.
Yeah, they're all standalone stories.
I see. And Radar Girls is available now everywhere where fine books are sold. Is that right? Yeah. And we can get it from our local bookstores and our friendly neighborhood websites.
Yeah, I had just had a friend go into the shop and they had all four of them in there.
Beautiful. So yeah, right. I'm right down the hill from there right now. So we love them around here. Thank you so much. And then I'd also like to introduce Gregory Shepherd, who is the author of Rings of Fire, which I have here, if you can see that. Gregory, would you tell us a little bit about the, I wish I had virtual lays for you guys. So I should like just drape them over the camera and you can receive them, but I didn't think of that. Could you tell us a little bit about the book, Greg, and your work, and we'll go from there?
Sure. First, my apologies for appearing like I fell asleep in the sun for about 8 hours. I don't have another light, and I didn't anticipate the sun being down. And of course, it is.
That's Zoom life. I've been there, yeah.
So anyway, I'll try to make myself a little bit more apparent. My book is Rings of Fire, and I wrote it, I finished it, and had its publishing date a bit before, a year before COVID hit. And the premise of it is that it's set at the Tokyo Olympics. And the opening passage is on 2 weeks before the opening ceremony of the Tokyo Olympics. And there's a terrorist plot to bring down the Olympics and to do all sorts of dark and dirty things. It starts with a prologue set in North Korea. There's a North Korea angle, as there was in my first book, Sea of Fire. This one is set in Japan, where the hero, Patrick Featherstone, lives and works. As in this case, he's the security head for the Tokyo Olympics. He himself is Hapa. He was raised in Japan. His mother is from Hawai, and she's part Japanese. And so, and the corruption level in the Tokyo Ministry of Defense, which was initially scheduled to handle the security, was such that some guy got booted. And they figured that they would bring in somebody who is not associated with the Japanese bureaucracy at all. And he has a track record as a sniper, and that's his background. So the book opens after the prologue in the Olympic Stadium, and there's a guy up in the rafters hiding out with a rifle. And I'm gonna start from there. This is Tokyo, July 10th, 2021. I'm dead. Adrenaline ignited the shooter's viscera, and his grip stiffened against the trigger. He relaxed slightly when he looked up into the rafters of the Olympic Stadium and saw it was only a tombi, a type of hawk, carrying a mid-sized carp from the lake in nearby Akasaka Palace in her beak. The tiny squeaks of her hungry chicks in their raftered nest pinged off the canopy as their mother landed and began shredding the fish with razor-like claws. The man swore silently. Although he had breached the highest levels of security and made his way to his hide undetected in the middle of the night, he had just come close to a panic pull of the trigger. Swearing again, he took several deep breaths, feeling his pulse gradually decrease. It was just after 3 a.m., exactly 2 weeks before the games of the 32nd Olympiad were set to begin, that the squat, powerful-looking figure clothed entirely in black began his ascent of the south wall of the stadium. The raucous frenzy of nightlife in the area had evaporated after the last subway pulled out at midnight. Now the only sounds were the occasional shout of a drunk in the distance, or the roar of a passing taxi, or the stifled grunts of the solitary figure as he shimmied himself up the pylons, pausing every once in a while to rechalk his hands and look down onto the main concourse. He had timed his ascent to the clockwork punctuality of the 8 security guards who were posted below. None of them ever looked up. They had been told that the 5G AI security system was fully operational, even this far out from the start of the games, and that it was well nigh impossible for anyone to fool sensors that could distinguish between those taxis in the distance, or that cat skulking in the shadows, or that human attempting to scale the south wall. But the solitary figure in black, who was indeed scaling that south wall, had trained at Kumsung Military College, where from morning until night, He had hit things, broken things, had things broken on his head, driven nails through boards with his forehead, rolled around in broken glass, pulled trucks filled with soldiers, and hit tiny bullseyes 100 yards away. So breaching a stadium with state-of-the-art security, child's play. Even though he had to admit that architect Kengo Kuma's design, with its tiered gardens protruding 20 feet out onto the way, challenged his climbing skills like few structures had at Kumsung Military College in North Korea. But now he was settled in his perch, high up in the stadium, and waiting for his targets to appear. His trigger finger was on hot standby as he beheld the stadium that surrounded him, lit only by starlight. And that goes on with the breaking of dawn and the entry of the security detail with their final, one of their final training drills. And that gun that he's carrying, if we remember our Chekhov, has to be shot. You can't produce a loaded gun and then put it down. So that's what he does by the end of the chapter. And that begins the mayhem that hopefully keeps this plot rolling along until the tumultuous ending.
I guess what I'm curious about is, how does research fit into your process in terms of the other parts of writing, like where, formulating an idea and that type of thing? Is it before, during, and after the writing process itself? And we should probably compartmentalize a little bit because we don't want to speak over each other in Zoom. Would you like to start, Sarah, and then we'll go to Greg?
Sure. It is definitely, I think having this being my fourth one, it's helped just, in the last books, learning more about the Pearl Harbor, like ins and outs and all the battles and the timelines, and because it's a lot,
Wow.
And so usually I come up with an idea, and then once I get the idea, I think, oh my gosh, now what am I going to do? How am I going to actually write this? And this was, I think, maybe the hardest, in terms of research, because of all the radar, the technical details with the radar and how they were tracking the planes and what actually went on in Little Robert, which is where they worked. And so I have a couple really good books that I've had. And then I also watch movies. I watched some old movies about in England during the war, the women who were also working the radar. And I talked to people. In this case, it was really unfortunate though, because all the women from the Women's Area Defense that I had tried to reach had passed on. And I did actually get to speak with one of them. She's 99. I just spoke with her recently for the first time, but I had already written the book at that point. And so, but she and three other women had written a book called The Shuffleboard Pilots. And this book was amazing. They had put down everything. It was full of information, technical stuff, very much about their jobs, but also all the personal stuff. The husbands going off to war, and then and they would track them as their ships went out or the ships came in. And then, some of them not making it back. And so that book was very instrumental.
And is that book and the other ones that you used, are they books for general audiences, or are they sort of like more, something that historians and PhD students read?
I got it on Amazon, and it was fascinating. And I don't know if it was just fascinating to me. I think if you like history, you would find it fascinating no matter what. But it's not a scholarly text. It's sort of something for, okay. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's really interesting. I was wondering about that because it feels very informed, and there's a lot of originality to it as well. There's stories about World War II that I wasn't aware of and whatnot. So it seems like it was challenging.
And it was helpful. And so, for usually a few months, I'll read, talk to people, watch stuff. And then the research also always informs what I'm writing, because I'll read something and be like, oh my gosh, I need to add that in. That's amazing. It always happens. It always really informs the novel as well.
I see.
And so it did happen with this one also. And I have the characters are all fictional from my imagination. Daisy, a little bit based on my mom, who was grew up in Wailua and was one of the only Haole kids at the school, and her dad was the principal there.
Oh.
And so I just kind of all my mom's stories about being out there as a kid. But so the characters are fictional, but a lot of the stories I tried to weave in were actually from that book, The Shuffleboard Pilots.
How about you, Greg? Do you think Patrick Featherstone will head to Albania in the next book or anything like that?
Not Albania, England, though, I think.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I didn't want is to be specifically tied to Asia, East Asia, Japan. I lived most of my life in Hawaii. And so this book I'm writing now, the Hawaii portion of it, was not all that hard in terms of establishing a sense of place, interactions and things like that. There's a safe house, a CIA safe house down in Chinatown that figures into this book. And there actually is one, or was one down there.
Oh.
But don't tell anybody, it's secret.
Okay, I'll go there if I'm in danger.
Between you and me and the internet.
Right. Let the radar girls pick up anything incoming.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, crossover.
Yeah, right, we'll collaborate. But I lived in England for a while, and I love it. And it would be a nice little write-off to take a trip over there for research, because that's where I want to go after this one, if it turns into a fourth one. Because Patrick, in this one I'm writing now, he does go to England, to Oxford in particular, and I have all sorts of ancestors from that area, and also other areas of England, which I would like to bring in somehow. And I'm finding that I'm glad that I left his ancestry a little bit open, so that I can infuse his bloodlines with some of mine, and have him make connections when he goes to England. But that's in the future. But no, I'm not tied to Japan or North Korea, certainly not, because I've never been there, except undercover. But don't tell anybody. So that's where I am with that.
Excellent. I hope this doesn't seem like a silly question, but I think one thing about both of your books, I guess without a better way to put it, is why does fiction work well for you to address these interests? You know, as I said, the books are really well informed, but you've chosen obviously not to write, you know, narrative nonfiction or other things. What is it about this form, the sort of, you know, I guess you could say the historical or the very realist novel, which is something I'm really interested in, because I teach students who they don't even really realize that there's fiction that's not, you know, doesn't have wizards and dragons and things like that in it, and they're sort of shocked to have to read that in a fiction workshop. I was just curious, how is a kind of a realistic fictional style important to you? How does it allow you to do things that you couldn't do in nonfiction or something else?
Greg, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. For me, I've been writing in the thriller genre, and the reason is because I enjoy that, reading that myself. And I just like the thrust of that genre, because there's a problem, there's a explication of that problem, which allows all sorts of character development and all sorts of antagonist, protagonist kinds of conflict. And it has hopefully a clear ending that is not so cut and dried that it marks the end of the series. Like I don't want to kill off Patrick yet, but it lends itself to a style that I like. I like the clarity of it, but also it's so fraught with tension and conflict, which keeps it moving along.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to write a thriller. And one of these days, hopefully I will. In fact, my next book that I'm actually editing now, it does have a kind of a murder mystery in it. But I think I just love, like, I love stories, you know, like I was saying about when I was in history class, I love stories. But I love the ability to kind of create my own stories around a situation. So when you're writing narrative nonfiction, I think you're just really tied to the facts.
Mhm.
And I love, you know, letting my imagination kind of go wild and see what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Because you're just not tied down to, you know, it's kind of the sky's the limit with fiction.
Mhm.
And I know I loved the book Wired for Story by Lisa Cron.
Oh yeah.
I think that's just a great book, and how it just talks about our brains are so wired for story, you know, and so
Interesting.
by creating stories, we are those who tell the stories rule the world. I think that was a proverb.
Well,
not to
that's
interrupt.
why I have all this.
Not to interrupt, Sarah, but I just saw something in the Wall Street Journal about how storytelling will actually unite people's like pulse rate and respiration. And it's very, very fascinating. I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing, but I'm going to see if we have it in our college library.